These are the two keys to sprinting mechanics, and I think by correcting one of these two things, you'd be able to correct 95% of sprinting mechanics problems, potentially even more problems, which just means that you're going to be able to sprint faster, accelerate better, stay healthy, and really utilize the training that you're doing within drills, within the weight room, to better transfer over into sprinting so you're not wasting as much time just doing practices that aren't leading you anywhere. And so if that ends up being something you want to be able to work on, watch this video. We're going to really focus on these two areas, which are, of course, the front side mechanics and also the push off. I think this is the real paradox or chicken versus the egg of sprinting. If you don't have a good push off, then the likelihood of you having good front side mechanics or a good foot strike are very limited. While if you're not able to properly strike the ground or don't have the right front side mechanics to properly strike the ground, you're not going to be able to have a good push off. So first we'll get into more of the performance side of it, how you can better strike the ground to then have a better push off, and then how could you have a better push off to then more effectively strike the ground. And then we'll get more into how that's going to impact your training, how that's going to impact your workouts, how it's also going to make it so you're able to stay healthy. So let's go and hop right into it here. I don't want to waste your time. We're going to look at Christian Coleman here on the right, probably the best starter in the world. And then this is a athlete working on his acceleration. And so obviously when we think about what happens first when you're sprinting, it is the push off that happens first and then the foot strikes. The big, I guess, debate is between the front side mechanics. And I say front side mechanics, it really goes into the foot strike, but I don't think you could have a great foot strike unless you do the right things leading up to the right foot strike. So that's why I just say front side mechanics and then also the push off, because I do think that the push off is what leads to what you're doing with the backside. And really what we want to be thinking about when sprinting or training for sprinting is what are we doing as the foot is on the ground? That is the most important part of sprinting in general, is when is your foot on the ground, because that's the only time where you have the opportunity to have any type of forward translation with your body. So everything that you're doing off the ground is all going to be based off of the momentum and the things that you've done as your foot has been in contact with the ground. So in general, we want to be very aware of what we're doing to strike the ground and also to push off the ground to make it so we are either getting vertical or horizontal based off of when we're running. And so when we talk about the push off, what's important to understand is that at the beginning, when we're accelerating, it's much more about pushing outwards and being horizontal. And so what we see here with Christian Coleman is he does a great job of getting a great shin angle. He's very high on the toe and he gets a lot of forward push off with his body. And really, to me, he's getting his heel in front of his toes as the foot ends up coming off the ground. This is a very difficult thing to do and a very rare thing to do, but makes it so then he is setting himself up perfectly for being able to then strike the ground effectively. So we're not going to go too much into the right leg just because that leg just kind of comes up and through. We're going to still focus on the left leg. But if we look to see the same type of thing out of the other athlete, I mean, we do see a lift here. We do see kind of a push off, but we're looking at that front foot, right? We're seeing a lot higher shin, a lot higher knee position. And we can see also that at push off, the heel is behind the toe, looking at this foot here. So therefore, the foot ends up lifting back behind as opposed to getting here, getting the push off. So then what Coleman's able to do is get himself into this position, a great front side, getting the toe in more of an upward position. He obviously doesn't have the time to get all the way up with the toe here and then gets right back into foot strikes. So now he's landing with that heel so far off the ground. I won't get too much into a bunch of technical jargon here, but I do want to be able to really hone in on what ends up making it so then we can properly strike the ground. So really for this athlete, this makes it a lot more time that he's spending with his leg cycle to then strike the ground in not as good of a position. We could see out of these two, if we're trying to go this way, this is a lot better position than this. And he's going to be able to transition off the ground a lot faster and then push off much more effectively, which is going to make it so he's able to accelerate more effectively than if you have the heel close to the ground. So what we want to be able to understand is when it comes to your push off and acceleration, it's a lot about the shin angle. This has been something I've been talking to athletes a lot this week, and I do think it's a very important thing to take note of is if you have a good shin angle at push off, it makes a big difference when it comes to your ability to get into the proper front side mechanics. Now, what we think about with the front side is, to me, it's like a critical moment as we get into the toe off here, what we want to be able to understand is the front side wants to be in the highest position, or the knee wants to be in the highest position, toe wants to be in the highest position. So as soon as this foot comes off the ground, we want to be pulling back and down with that opposite leg. So you can see as soon as that left foot comes off the ground, that other foot ends up going and striking back down. Okay, so what we'll end up seeing is a lot of times as people will come off the ground, they'll start to try reaching outwards or forwards, when really you want to be going back and down as that foot's coming off the ground, which really puts an emphasis on getting the knees up. So what you want to be able to do in order to get there, or a cue that I usually tell people, is as this foot's striking the ground, we want to be able to have these knees as close to in a straight line as possible. When you go into your training, your workouts, your drills, you want to have a good relationship of understanding, how am I properly going to strike the ground, and then how am I going to properly push off every single time your foot's striking the ground. You want to be aware of both the foot strike and also the push off in order to make it so then you can have the effective sprinting mechanics to be able to run faster. So let's talk a little bit more about the injury side of it and how we can prevent injuries, and also how your training or what you're doing inside of the weight room can end up having a negative impact on your sprinting. And so here is an example. And the first thing I would say is going to undoubtedly be just the range of motion within the ankles. If you don't have good both dorsiflexion and plantar flexion, or don't have good range of motion within your ankles in general, the ability to be able to run fast is just very, very limited. If you were going to be stiff within the ankles, it would be better to have stiffness and dorsiflexion, but that still wouldn't correct the overall issue. A lot of it comes from the range of motion within the feet, the range of motion within the ankles. So what we're going to be looking at here is, here on the left, we can see as the foot is coming through, we're looking at the right leg. One, the push off is not great there. We're not getting a ton of forward motion with the push off, so then therefore the foot ends up going a little bit more upwards and back behind. But the big thing is, and really very limited in just overall extension in general, so we're not really using that posterior chain, but the big thing is the knee is going outward. As their legs are swinging through, we can see here, we get a lot more of like this straight forward knee position, okay, as opposed to this wide knee position. And what I've found is that this ends up being a lot of times what like heavy squatting and things like that do, is it makes it so you're very limited in internal rotation. So if you want to run faster, make sure you have good internal rotation and you're using it when you're sprinting. So you want to make sure your knees, while your foot ends up striking the ground, that you could have more separation here, or have your foot land underneath you here, and we'll get more into that. But as your leg is coming through, you really want to have your knee to be facing straight ahead. You don't want to end up having it going off to the side. So that has to do with what we're doing to maximize our front side mechanics. Again, this is just going into how you can correct so many issues, right? There's so many problems that could be addressed if you just have the right push off, right? So if you get better extension here and gets the leg straight through, as opposed to right here where he's not getting very much extension with his leg. So then therefore he ends up bringing his knee out to the side, where obviously no Lyle's much better push off. So now he gets his knee to come right inside. So even as your foot's pushing off the ground, when you get into top speed, you want to be aware of, where is my leg going from this position, to make it so then I'm setting myself up to effectively strike the ground. Then we can see as his foot then comes around and strikes the ground, landing a lot more on the outside part of the foot, collapses in a lot, which is going to make it so he's not going to have nearly as strong of a push off. So I'm not going to go into all the problems here, but it just is another way of showing the push off, right? So the idea would be, when you're pushing off, you'd want to have that foot facing more straight back as opposed to facing inwards, to then make it so then as your foot comes through, and he actually does not a bad job of getting his knee to come straight through here, but I mean, you could already see with this leg how he's coming so far across, and a lot of that has to do with what he's doing as the foot is coming off the ground. Again, same type of thing as he's getting into front side, because that knee and foot ended up pushing off the way that it did. Now he's basically rotating a ton within his hips to make it so then he's going and striking the ground, and just a lot of crossover. I think, again, a lot of it has to do with how you push off, right? So if you don't have the push off right, then you don't get the front side mechanics to then properly strike the ground, because his foot's so turned out to the side like that as he's striking the ground, and because his legs are so turned out, that makes it so then his front side isn't good. So to me, I don't think that there's one that ends up being more important than the other. I think you want to be able to understand understand how to have effective front side mechanics to make it so then you can improve your speed. I will say that a big part of being able to run fast, in my opinion, ends up being part of the front side mechanics that I see a lot of people kind of struggle with. Just to, again, give you guys some ideas of like what can you work on within your technique. I would say as your leg is coming forward, not only is it important to get your knee to go straight through, but you also want to be able to, the best of your ability, maintain as much height with the heel as possible. So what I'll see is a lot of people are very quick to drop their heel kind of downwards instead of what we see with Usain Bolt. He does a really good job of going more outwards with the heel. Yeah, it is definitely going down. I don't think there's any way that you can make it so it doesn't go down, but I think the better we could do with being able to go outwards with that heel instead of downwards makes it so then when you strike the ground, you'll have more of your momentum going forward. And I think when it comes to your front side mechanics, what you want to be doing the best of your ability is getting as much of your momentum on the front part of that foot as possible to make it so then you're able to effectively push off as quickly as possible. So the people that struggle with the push off, what they'll do is they'll land typically further back in the foot, or will also land with their foot excessively turned out or maybe in, but mostly out, or like their foot's turned more out. So instead of it being like flat like this, like dorsiflex, we'll see a lot of people that are going to be like that as their foot. So their pinky toe is basically touching the ground first, and then they collapse inwards to the big toe, where you want to be landing more on the inside part of the foot, more towards the big toe, like we're seeing here with Usain Bolt, and on the front side of the foot. So then you can get into a great push off position. Because to me, you can't run fast if you're not getting into this push off position. We'll see a lot of people that will struggle getting into that range, getting into that good push, and then will then have issues with their backside, right? And what they're doing with their foot off the ground to then transition themselves into the front side. I don't want to take away the importance of the arms. I don't want to take away the importance of the head position, spine position, what you're doing within the pelvis, things like that. But I think at the end of the day, if you really want to get specific into the two areas that are going to give the most bang for your buck, I'd put the biggest focus on what are you doing on the front side, and then what are you doing as you're pushing off. I hope this added some clarity into those two areas and what you could potentially work on. I have a ton of videos about the foot strike, the front side mechanics, the push off, all the get a little bit more in depth into all of them, even though in this video, I think we did a lot of stuff here. But then I also think it's important to understand some of the drills and some of the exercises that are going to be important in order to really master this. But I just wanted to kind of go over some of the issues that go over with sprinting, and so we could see them to then be able to hopefully, if they connect with you, be able to address them, which will make it so then you can improve your speed. So as always, guys, thanks for watching. I hope this ends up making a big difference for you with your own sprinting. And as always, we'll talk to you soon.